Okay. All right, so my name is Eden Pitini, and for my Theorists in the News, I will be looking at Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, and Karen Horney. All right, first up we have Sigmund Freud and the ego. Okay, so the event I chose for this was the Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. So on Friday the 13th, which I just thought that was interesting, it's Friday the 13th of October 1972, a plane full of rugby players, their friends, and family crashed in the Andes Mountains. As you can see over here on the right, the plane was pretty much demolished. Both wings came off during the crash, the front and back of the planes. It was pretty bad. Those who survived the initial crash, they ended up having to resort to cannibalism. They were there for 2 months before they were rescued, and they ran out of food after about a week. So, as you can imagine, there was a lot of time in between that where they needed sustenance. Out of 45 people, only 16 of them survived until rescue. They got a lot of public backlash for cannibalism. For obvious reasons, it's a very hard thing to have to go through and hear about. And so the survivors, the men who lived, they compared cannibalism to the blood and body of Christ, just to kind of break it down into terms that people understood. And this resulted in the church absolving the men of any sins that they thought that they had committed. So, yeah. And then, so the connection to Freud, we have the survivors' struggle against death. So that idea of the innate animal instincts that lead people unconsciously toward decay, destruction, and aggression. And then we have those life needs, the basic ones, food, water, air, and sex. So this high-stress environment repress their sex need and replace it with that desperation to survive, right? They're in a cold, wintry area, and so that willingness to partake in socially taboo things like cannibalism was a lot easier because they were desperate for food and water. And then connection to Freud's egos. So we have the id ego. So this would have been people who thought to eat their friends and family to survive and just felt completely justified in it. You know, that idea of I'm living, you're not. So I'm going to eat your body because if I don't, I'm going to die. And I don't really feel bad about it because you're dead. So there's nothing to feel bad about. And they were probably more concerned with reality anxiety of if I don't find something to eat, I will die. So it's more important that I eat and worry about morality later. And then we have the ego, so people who understood the rationale of resorting to cannibalism, but also they partook, but also felt some shame and guilt. So that idea of moral anxiety of, I understand that, this is essential to my survival, but also part of me doesn't really feel super great about it. And then the idea of superego, so those people who refused to resort to cannibalism and died, and sort of that idea of neurotic anxiety in the subconscious, being afraid of, if I do make it, what's society going to think of me, and how am I going to continue living with myself if I partake in this. Then we have an ego defense example. So again, the rationalization, those survivors who were ridiculed for resorting to cannibalism, they rationalized it by comparing it to the Last Supper. So sort of the idea of putting it in terms that they were familiar with to kind of make it seem a little less crazy. And then we have Freud's psychosexual stages. So we have the oral stage. So if the men had, reverted back to their infantile ways, they would have actually enjoyed eating their dead relations because it satisfies that oral sensation. And then we have the anal stage. So anal retentive personality. The men would have hoarded any food that they had for themselves. The idea of selfishness about, me and, I'm just going to hold everything in and it's mine. And then we have the phallic stage and the lack of female presence because all the survivors were male. So that lack of female presence resulted in increased Oedipus complex, so the desire for female attention of the mother. And then we have the genital stage, which is where they actually were in development. So more acceptable to pursue those impulses. And that, we're just going to go for it. We're going to eat the people in this plane because we need to survive. And it makes sense that all the survivors of the plane were, they were all under 30, and they were all men in their prime. So that makes a lot of sense. Then next we have Alfred Adler and inferiority and fictional finalism. So I did the Martin Luther King Jr. I Have a Dream speech. So it was given August 28th, 1963 at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And I have a quote here, so it says, "No, no, we are not satisfied. We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like the waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." So up, at the very beginning it says, we are not satisfied with the society that we live in, and we will not be satisfied until we get to a better place where all men actually are held, created equal, and treated as such. And so the idea of the American dream and freedom, and how do we actually apply that, we're not quite there yet, and so that's striving for superiority. So connection to Adler, the emphasis of past experiences and how they impact current actions. So Martin Luther's grandma died when he was very young. This influenced his belief in personal immortality, the idea that we all have immortal souls. And then also he had a white childhood friend who was told not to play with him because he was black. And that had a big impact on him, and kind of he realized, not everyone looks like me, and there's, society hasn't got to a spot where we treat people equally. So he grew up with people telling him that he was inferior. So he had to strive to overcome that inferiority belief. So he strove to make the world a better place, the best place that it could be. And his I Have a Dream pictured a fictional finalist world where people could live together in harmony and love regardless of race. So that idea that there is a ideal utopia where we all want to get to. He was a socially useful type, civil rights activist, social justice, the idea of I'm going to improve myself, but I'm also going to improve the world around me, society. Birth order, he was the second-born child, so competitive, ambitious, driven, that quote, a desire to outpace his older sister. I have another quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed." So again, taking that competitive, ambitious, driven spirit from the second-born and kind of applying that into how can we strive for perfection. All right, and then finally we have Karen Horney on safety, basic needs, and the neurotic. All right, so I chose The Unknown Number, The High School Catfish, which is a Netflix documentary based on a real-life story in Isabella County, Michigan. 42-year-old mom, Kendra Licari, was found to be cyberbullying her teenage daughter, Lauren Licari, and the prosecuting attorney of the case, David Barbary, said we had tens of thousands of text messages, whether they were messages that were just for her daughter or some of her daughter's friends, and the digital footprint was insane. So there was some pretty intense cyberbullying going on, where the mom was pretending to be other people, disguised as peers, but she was attacking Lauren, her friends, her boyfriend, a lot of really vulgar comments, sexual comments, and then, when the mom was found out, she admitted to everything. She was like, yeah, it was me all along, which is a shock because no one thought it was her. The connection to Horny, so we have the idea of safety and freedom from fear. Lauren lacked safety from her mom, obviously, because her mom was loving and reassuring on the outside, when in reality she was the one causing all of Lauren's pain and stress. So because of this, Lauren suffered from basic anxiety, that idea that pervasive loneliness and helplessness, she couldn't protect herself, and her mom wasn't protecting herself either. So she tried to protect herself by withdrawing from those around her, because if I'm not around people, then I can't be hurt by people. And then the mom's neuroticism, that need for affection and approval from her daughter, power, exploitation, prestige. She wanted to be needed, and so she caused her daughter pain so that her daughter would need her, which is really messed up. And then those neurotic trends, it was kind of a mix of movement toward others, so that need for affection and fear of abandonment by her daughter, paired with a movement against others, so the grandiose fantasies of being needed and manifested in harmful behavior toward her daughter. So I feel like it was kind of a mix of the two. So the theorists, they have very different views on how to cope with trials, but I think they all have valid points and valid things to say. So I thought it was interesting to do a deep dive into each of their theories. Thanks for watching, and these are my sources.